Hi. So I thought of changing the topic today to something which is a little bit different and maybe try to explain something on a different basis. So I was going to talk about Darwin and the evolution. And certainly, everybody who is in the scientific community does believe that the Darwinian evolution did occur. In fact, there are more people who believe that even there is a universal Darwinian, which means the better ideas, better life, and everybody survives. The ideas which are not that good don't survive, and the evolution occurred. Darwin was born several centuries ago. I think he was born somewhere in 1830 or so, 1809, and he ended up going to South America, and there he saw the life as well as the fossil evidence. And after 20 years of work, he found out the theory that we all started with a single organism, and our all ancestors are the same. Of course, at the time when Darwin was doing this research, and when he wrote the book Origin of Species, he had no idea about the genes because the human beings did not know about the genes. The genetic mapping occurred under Francis Collins, Dr. Francis Collins, in this country, the human genomes. And then again, of course, we know about the DNA. A lot of us talk about the DNA and the genes, but a lot of us have no idea exactly what does it mean, even though we know what the effect is. So according to the Darwins, we all started with one ancestor, maybe a one singular cell organism like amoeba. And from there we have developed. But it is very hard for a common person to imagine that a 279 cell worm and a mouse and a human being would all have the same ancestors. It is impossible to perceive that the bald eagle, which flies way high up in the sky, and the fish that swims in the ocean, and of course the human beings which produce the computers and all sorts of other technologies, all came from the same single cell organisms. But when you look at the genes, and there are about 3 billion genes which were mapped under the Dr. Collins, 20 to 25,000 genes, very small percentage of total genes, are involved or are required in production of protein. And when you compare them, they are pretty similar even in the roundworm of 279 cells, and billions of cells in the human being have about the same type of protein producing genes. So the question is, what is exactly a gene and what is a DNA? So if you look at the cell structure, and again, as you can imagine, the cells are so small that you cannot see them with naked eye. The cell has to be seen under the microscope. So there are multiple cells which form an organ, and multiple organs form the human body. The cells that are involved in, say, making liver are different looking than the cells that are skin cells or the brain cells, which are called neurons, and or heart cells, which is more like a muscle. So each cell is different, but they all come from the single fertilized ovum. So even though they look different, they all come from the single fertilized ovum, which is only one cell at the beginning, but it has all the coded information in it to not only differentiate between the different cells and different organs and the entire human being. So if you have been surprised by looking at how a small computer can do so many things and calculations and even defeat any human being in playing chess, you should be more surprised to see how much information is recorded and stored in the single cell when the ovum is fertilized by the sperm. So just to go back to that particular line of thinking, there's an ovum which usually has half the genetic material from the mother, and a sperm which has a half of the genetic material from the male or man, comes together and the egg is fertilized or the ovum is fertilized. That fertilized egg now has 50% genetic material from the mother, 50% from the father, and that has entire coded information to make the entire human body. If you look at the skin and look at the liver, or look at the heart and look at the brain, there is no similarity in the look, but they all have the same ancestor. And if these cells, which we know for practical purposes are from the same, it is not impossible to imagine that single cell was the origin of entire organisms or the human beings, that we all have the same ancestors. So just to go back to the understanding of the cell, and I know I will not be in position to finish the entire understanding in this short, small video, so I'll have to continue it, but just to start. So there are multiple cells in each organ, and multiple organs together form an entire person or an animal or a species. So when you look under the microscope, each cell has a central center, which is like a nucleus. You could consider that as the capital of a country. In that nucleus, there are threads. These are called chromosomes, and then they are genes. Gene is a small fragment of a DNA. So the DNA itself, and imagine this now, DNA is about 6 feet long, twisted on itself, that's called double helix, and it is like a twisted ladder. So there is a symmetry between the right and the left side, or the two sides. And this twisted ladder, small piece, is called genes. There is an information on these genes to perform certain function. So when you talk about the protein producing genes, out of total of 3+ billion genes, 3.4 billions, only 20 to 25,000 genes are involved in production of protein, which are similar in human being to mice, mice to fish, fish to eagle. So now you understand that there is a significant symmetry or commonness between all of our animal kingdom and ancestors. So we all come from the single cell evolution. What sometimes I don't agree is that why did the evolution occur? And even though Darwin proposed the evolution on the basis of survival of the fittest and the procreation, I have some other views, and that's what I want to talk about in the future. This had nothing to do with questioning the genes, but I'm going to talk about some abnormal genes in the future and see how that maps out. Though I will have to go through some of the genetic understanding so that I can explain what exactly the genetic mutation occurs and what are the different mutations that are also seen in somatic cell, and what are the mutations that are seen in a cancer cell. What are the mutations that are seen in a child compared to his both parents? Because I just stated that you get half the genes from the father, half the genes from the mother, but we all have our own mutation that has occurred. So I want to talk about that too. I hope you like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll be talking about this probably for next couple of videos. Thank you. Have a nice day. If you enjoy this, please subscribe.